Hello, my name's Iain Law. I'm a senior lecturer in philosophy at the University of Birmingham, and this is going to be a series of videos about Kantian deontological ethics. So before we get to Kantianism, we need to talk a little bit about what deontological ethics is, and to do that we need to understand what kind of thing a moral theory is. So a moral theory is an attempt to categorize actions into what we call deontic statuses. You could think of these as moral categories. So think of an action you could perform. You could pause this video and go and make a cup of tea. You would probably think of that act as being neither morally right nor morally wrong. It's permissible. But suppose suddenly you were called upon to go and help a friend in extreme need. You might think that it was your moral duty to do that. So that would get the deontic status of obligatory. It would be in the category of right actions. Suppose you took it into your head, you were tempted to do something pretty awful, and then your conscience kicked in and told you that that was the wrong thing to do. That would be you assigning it the deontic status of impermissible. It would be in the moral category of things that are wrong to do. So moral theories are ways of telling us which of these deontic statuses possible actions can have. So any theory which tries to do that, which says, give me some candidate actions and I'll tell you which deontic status they have, we could call a deontic moral theory. That's because it's trying to assign these deontic statuses to things. It's trying to sort actions into these categories. But there's a distinction between a deontic moral theory and a deontological moral theory. This can be hard to remember because these are unusual terms, and they're terms that we don't use outside of academic moral philosophy. But if you're at all familiar with utilitarianism, you'll remember that utilitarianism sorts actions into categories like obligatory and impermissible. So utilitarianism could be thought of as a deontic moral theory. It's a moral theory which assigns deontic statuses to potential actions. But it's not a deontological moral theory. Deontological moral theories are, roughly, those which take a non-consequentialist approach to assigning actions to deontic statuses. So consequentialism, as you'll know if you'll have seen the first video in my series on utilitarianism, is the theory that says the consequences of your actions are what matter to determining their moral status, their deontic status. But if you think that there are certain things which are right or wrong not because of their actions, but just because of the kind of action that they are, that might be a deontological approach. So suppose you think the reason why you shouldn't lie or cheat or murder or assault or steal isn't just that the consequences of doing so are bad, but because of the nature of the act in some sense, or the fact that there's a moral rule forbidding such things. That would be a deontological theory. The most influential deontological theory, at least in academic ethics in the English-speaking world, is Kantian ethics. But it's important to note that deontological theories aren't just Kantian theories. There are non-Kantian forms of deontological moral theory. So some examples include divine command theory, which says that the moral rules are given by God, and the right thing to do is whatever God commands you to do. There's natural law theory, which says that somehow studying nature and natural functions can tell us what the moral rules are. And then there are theories like those of W.D. Ross, who came up with a theory of pluralistic moral principles, moral duties which give way to each other in one way in one situation and a different way in a different situation. So even if you don't find Kantian deontological ethics all that attractive, you shouldn't assume that you therefore must be a utilitarian. These are not the only moral theories on offer. So what's distinctive about Kantian deontological ethics? Well, it's named after a particular person, Immanuel Kant. So Kant was a philosopher who made contributions in a range of subdisciplines within philosophy. He lived mostly in the 18th century in what was then East Prussia, in the town of Königsberg. His approach to ethics is a very starkly non-consequentialist approach. So Kant thinks that we can arrive at rules governing our conduct, moral rules, just by working out what he calls pure practical reason, not by thinking directly about the consequences of our actions. His most famous work of moral philosophy is called The Groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals, and it's intended actually just to be the first part of his complete project. The word groundwork is not an accident. He went on and wrote a book called The Critique of Practical Judgment, which was about how we make moral judgments. And then he wrote The Metaphysics of Morals itself, not the groundwork of the metaphysics of morals, but the thing itself. Nevertheless, the groundwork of the metaphysics of morals is what most people pay most attention to. And he begins the groundwork by making the claim that the only thing that is good in itself is a good will. So other things may be good, but they're not good unconditionally. And Kant treats this as meaning that they're not good in themselves. So, for example, he considers the claim that happiness is good. And he says, well, happiness is good, but it's not good if the scoundrel becomes happy as a result of screwing other people over. That happiness isn't good. So happiness is only conditionally good. But if we think of a good will, he says, we will see that there are no conditions on its goodness. A good will must be good. To understand why this is, we need to understand what kind of thing a will is. So the will is a faculty of the mind. You might think it's similar to desire. So you can want a certain outcome, you can will a certain outcome. Kant sees these as rather different. So wanting something could be a kind of idly wishing that it were so. But willing that a certain outcome come about is actually taking steps to bring that about. Something can only be said to be your will, as opposed to merely your desire, if you are really trying to move towards it and bring it about. So suppose I said to you that my will was to win the lottery, but that I hadn't bought a ticket. There would be something contradictory about that. Kant says that if you will the end, you necessarily will the means. What this means is, if you have something as a goal, and there is something which is indispensable towards achieving that goal, you can only be said to truly will that this goal be achieved if you're prepared to take these indispensable means to it. And this is going to be important later on. So roughly speaking, your will is your faculty of putting plans into action. It's your faculty of not just experiencing desire, but moving towards what it is that you want. And Kant thinks this faculty, if you are a good person, and if this faculty is directed towards doing good things and acting morally, that is good in itself. Even if something goes wrong and your actions don't have the intended effect, nevertheless your will was good. And there is no set of circumstances in which we can say that it failed to be good. So the good will is good in itself. But what is it that you will if your will is good? Kant's answer is that you have a good will when what it is that you try to do is the right thing. Furthermore, he thinks what it is that you try to do must be done because it is the right thing. And here we get to his distinction between acting from duty and acting merely in accordance with duty. Here's an example of acting merely in accordance with duty. Let's suppose it's my duty to see students who have difficulties, respond to their questions, and so on. And let's suppose that I do this. This means we know that I am acting in accordance with duty. My deeds are the ones that duty requires of me. But let's say I'm doing this for entirely selfish reasons. Maybe my boss has said to me, Iain, if we get good reports about you being there in your office and helping students with questions, we'll give you a promotion, or we'll give you more money, or we won't fire you, or something like that. So what I'm doing is in accordance with duty, but I'm not doing it because it's my duty. I'm not actually moved by the thought, this is what I ought to do for moral reasons. Instead, I'm moved by the thought, this will be beneficial to me. Contrast this with my friend who does the right thing by her students because it's the right thing to do. And when someone says to her, "Why do you devote so much time to helping your students?" she says, "Well, of course I have to. Of course I must. It's what I ought to do." She's acting from duty. She's doing the right thing because it's the right thing. But I'm just acting in accordance with duty. And according to Kant, this means that my action has no moral worth. Only actions which are done from duty have moral worth. This is a claim which has some surprising implications, which I'll talk about in the next video.